So we've been talking about the different Jesus is, right? So Jesus is a prophet, Jesus is a priest, Jesus is a shepherd. So in our last installment of Jesus is, we're talking about Jesus as the good king. So you know me, I like to start with a good story. So I'm like, all right, what's a good story of a king? And I'm like, there's only really fictional stories, like real kings. Like the last real king that I can think of was the current queen's dad, and I don't know if any of us in this room were around when he was alive, so so we don't really have him as a frame of reference. And I got thinking like King David, but we've heard those stories a million times. And then I thought of King Arthur and the Round Table, which is a good story, but that's fiction. And so I was Google searching. I don't know how pastors did it without Google. Like, I really don't know how they possibly found stories, and the Bible, they must have memorized the entire Bible, which I have not done. I am like, what's that one verse? And I'll Google search it, and it tells me. Thank you, Google. But, so I found this blog. This guy, these guys wrote this book, King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover, Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Wrote this book, and this guy, his name was Ben. He didn't give his last name, or maybe he's like Prince, I don't know. But he wrote this blog on this book about the archetypes of a king. So basically the characteristics of a king. And so I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. So instead of a story, because it's a lot, he has a lot of points. I thought we'd talk about the characteristics today of a king and how Jesus exhibits all of those characteristics. I'm pulling out my real teacher brain today, like using the PowerPoint, you guys, because it's a lot to remember. So, first of all, he said that a king is centered. And I put a quote that he put in the blog, because he said it really well. He said his confidence, his purpose, his well-being give him a supreme sense of balance. Even though the world around him is chaotic, he remains calm, cool, collected. Calm, cool, and collected. So I think about Jesus. There were times in Jesus' life when the world around him was a hot mess, right? Like he was in a storm. The disciples were like, oh my gosh, we're going to drown. And he's sleeping because he's calm, cool, and collected. I mean, I can't think of a more calm, cool, and collected thing than to be taking a nap in the middle of a storm that's threatening your life. At his trial, they were punching him and spitting in his face and yelling, saying lies about him and accusing him. And like they put the thorns on his head. Like they were really mistreating him in his trial. And he did not lose his cool. He was calm, cool, and collected at that time because he was centered on what his mission was. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what needed to happen. And so he wasn't fighting it. And so I love that about Jesus. He was very grounded, even as a kid. The only story we have of Jesus when he's a kid, he is a 12-year-old separated from his parents. Those of you who have had 12-year-olds, imagine your 12-year-old being away from you for 3 days. They'd probably be freaking out. But Jesus is calm, cool, and collected, hanging out in church, talking to people about God. So he was very centered in his faith. He knew who he was and what he needed to do. A king is decisive. Okay, how many of you remember those, I think it was in the 90s, the WWJD bracelets that everybody wore, the What Would Jesus Do bracelets, right? So like when you have to make a decision, you think about Jesus, right? So Jesus, when he had to make decisions, it was easy for him because he knew his purpose. You know, it's like I tell people when I'm trying to lose weight, I have a choice between two foods. The right choice is easy to make. It's hard to follow up on. I know what I'm supposed to eat if I'm trying to eat right. Okay? So the king knows his business, and that makes decision-making easy for him. And in the blog, he said his ability to make decisions is rooted in two things. First, he is what he stands for. He knows what he stands for, and therefore any decision that is against that, nope, that's the wrong one. And it says that king's core values are centered on firm, unchanging principles. So when a crisis comes, he does not waver because he's already determined the course he's going to take. He's not like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do, I'm going to waffle. He's not inconsistent. I think a lot of us can agree that in this COVID situation, one of the biggest frustrations for a lot of us is the inconsistency. Walmart can be open And everyone can be in Walmart or Home Depot, but not this place of business. I have to wear a mask here and here, but I can get on a plane that's completely enclosed, and that's like, so there's all these inconsistencies, which makes it very difficult to follow the leadership when it's inconsistent, right? So when you know what you stand for, and you know the heart of what I have to accomplish, decisions are easy. What decisions should be made is easy to understand often. And Jesus was definitely that way. He is a man of integrity. It says that a king, he mends broken relationships. He keeps his word. He acts with honesty. He takes responsibility for his actions. He is who he says he is. And I think that can be really difficult if you've ever had a leader who stands up and says, we're going to do all these great things, but then when you see them in action, they do the opposite. It makes you lose faith and hope in them. But Jesus was not like that. You knew what you got with Jesus, right? Like, he was a man of his word. Like, there's a promise that I am waiting on, and I had something recently that shook my confidence in that promise. And one of the things I heard the Lord say is, Stephanie, where in the Bible did I break a promise? Nowhere. Sometimes the promises were ugly, like you're going to get taken over and taken into slavery, and that happened. So in the Bible, when God makes a promise, he comes through with it. It might be 25, 70 years later, but he comes through with it. And so he is a man of integrity. Jesus always kept his word. If someone came and said, my child, my servant is sick, he's like, oh, they're healed. And that person probably walked away going, what just happened? Like, he didn't even listen to me. And then they get home and find that it happened. That he was a man of his word. He did what he said, even if it didn't look like it at the time. And I think of like other kings, Jesus definitely came to mend the broken relationship between us and the Father. He came to mend relationships among people. And it says taking responsibility for his actions. I mean, Jesus did that. The better example I can think of is David. When David, that whole Bathsheba thing, that hot mess that David got himself into. When Nathan called him out on it, David's like, oh, snap, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And he repented of it. So that shows but a lot of leaders, if you call them out, they're like, well, you just, shut up and let me do my thing. Or they'll make excuses. But a good leader is like, you know what? You're right. I messed up. And they take responsibility for their actions. A good king protects his realm. He watches out for those around. And I think Jesus did this all the time. Jesus came to restore his realm. He came to protect his people. Jesus was always saving the least of these. He was healing people. He was fighting enemies. He would go up to someone who was demon possessed. He didn't yell and scream and shout and battle. He just get out. And the demons had to flee. He was not afraid to go after the enemy and protect what was his and for him it was his people. He was not afraid to go after demon-possessed things. He was not afraid to go after the Pharisees who were destroying his realm. He was not afraid to go and call them liars and hypocrites because they were destroying his realm. He was a man who protected his realm. And I think of in movies, old movies, horseback riding movies, the king's at the front of the charge, come on, he's leading the charge. And I sometimes think would a king really do that? Because if you're let's be real, a lot of times the first guy in the battle doesn't make it. But in a lot of these movies, the king's the one leading the charge. But in real life, the kings sit in their castles. They sit in their White Houses, and they give orders from the safety of their fortresses. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't sit back in the safety and call out curses and call out things from afar. He got in there, and he went to the cross by himself to protect his realm. He was the king in the movies who's leading the charge. Not only leading the charge, he's the one who went by himself into the fray and slayed the enemy. A good king provides order. I don't know if you guys have ever been if you ever worked for someone who's not a good manager and it's chaos and it's a mess and you never know what to expect. They say one thing one day and the next day they do something different, or they're not organized, or they don't have rules that they should. There are no rules where they are. It is very stressful to live in that environment. to work in that environment. Like I know as a coach, when I first showed up to coaching, my rules were 1 page. Now they're 5. Because I have all these rules. And I tried the best I can to enforce them with order. So whatever realm you are in, like our Jesus' realm was the kingdom, and he had rules. And a lot of people think like Jesus came, because Jesus came, we don't have to follow any of those Old Testament rules. They're all... And he even said, he's like, I didn't come to break the rules. I just came to help you see where how they're supposed to be enforced. You know what I mean? So Jesus was definitely after his Father's business, and he was consistent. Whatever he said, that's what went. He didn't waffle. He didn't go back and forth. He was consistent in creating order out of chaos. And I believe that the enemy loves chaos because chaos is stressful. And the enemy loves to create situations of chaos, and the Lord loves to come and bring order. The king creates and inspires creativity in others. I love this one. I never would have thought of this. Like if I would have been making this list by myself, I might have come up with 1 through 5. But number 6, I'm like, that's interesting. But I totally agree with it because, again, like I think about a working environment. If you have a dictator leader who just says, these are the rules, do what you're supposed to do, shut up, show up, do what I tell you, and go home and don't talk to me. Like, you're just not as invested. But if you have a boss who says, let's talk about this together. How can we do this together? What is a good way that we can do this together? To me, that makes I want to show up to work then. I want to use my gifts. You know, a good king inspires the people he's with to do beautiful things. You know, the Trinity created all of creation together, and they made us in their image, and it is our image to make beautiful things. And Jesus came to show that. That's why at Pentecost, there's so many spiritual gifts. Like if you look up like fruit of the Spirit or gifts of the Spirit, there's not just one, and it's not like we are all expected to have that one. There's a bunch of them, and each of us has more of them in different measure because he wants us to be creative. He wants us to create together. He doesn't want little robots. Like God didn't come to make a bunch of little robots to do his bidding. He came to inspire so that we can create. Like that's his whole purpose. And Jesus did that. He was trying to train his disciples so that they could create. And number 7. Sorry, I thought I had something else to say. I don't. The king blesses the lives of others. And so when you see this, Melchizedek did this. He blessed Abraham. So God had already blessed Abraham, and Melchizedek comes along and he blesses Abraham some more. And like there's a story in Mark 10 where Jesus is hanging out and a bunch of little kids are swarming around. The disciples are like, get out of here, kids. Like, this guy's important. He's got important things to say to us. The grown-ups are talking. You know, it's kind of that like the grown-ups are talking situation. And Jesus is like, no. And he scoops up a little kid and he's like, come on, kids. And they're gathering around and he's blessing them. He is giving each of them their own individual blessing so that they can create in the world and make a beautiful place. And he blesses them. He doesn't just hoard. You know, I think like a bad king, you look in movies, these bad kings just tax. Like Robin Hood, right? Like tax and just take. But a good king gives instead of takes. A good king fosters creativity and shares the wealth. And when we look in the Bible at blessings, like Melchizedek blessed Abraham, blessings were a big deal. Jacob and Esau, remember Jacob tricked Esau to get his blessing. And then think about this was, Joseph, Technicolor coat Joseph, you know, the guy. When his sons were getting blessed, the older son was on the right side, the younger son was on the left side, and he crossed his hands to bless them, and his son's like, no, like, you're not supposed to do it that way. He's like, yeah, I am. Like, blessings were a big deal. Blessings weren't a big deal. He'd be like, oh, whatever. Grandpa's losing his mind. It's fine. But he's like, no, you got to give specific blessings to specific people. And he's like, yeah, and this is the way it should go. Blessings were a big deal in the Old Testament. Patriarchs always sent a blessing along. It was like a gift of spiritual blessings and things that meant something to them. And Jesus came and did that. Jesus blessed children. Jesus blessed his disciples. And finally, a good king leaves a legacy. And when I think of legacy, I always think of the story of Alfred Noble. I think I've told you guys this story. I didn't realize, I don't know how I heard this story. Alfred Noble's brother died, and somebody thought it was Alfred Noble, so they wrote his obituary. And Alfred Noble invented gunpowder. And so they called him the Merchant of Death. And so here he is reading his own obituary and realizing his legacy is death. And he was heartbroken by it. He didn't want to be known as the Merchant of Death. He didn't want that to be the epitaph, whatever, the thing on his headstone. He wanted it to be something good. And so fortunately for him, he wasn't dead. And he was able to change his legacy midway through. So he invented the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the guy. He is the Nobel Prize. That's Alfred Nobel. And he's like, I want to inspire creativity. I want to inspire genius. I want to inspire I want to inspire people to invent and give and do all these things. So he's the Nobel of the Nobel Peace Prize. He changed his legacy because he understood the importance of a legacy. And a king understands the importance of a legacy. It says a good king leaves a good legacy. In John 14, we hear Jesus say that. This one always blows my mind. This verse blows my mind. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater, because I'm going to the Father. Even greater. Jesus made demons leave people. He healed people. He's walked on water, and we're supposed to do greater than that. Jesus didn't come to show a bunch of magic tricks, miracles. He came just to release over us, to bless us and leave a legacy and redirect us. The Lord has set us on a path and we were not on it. And Jesus is like, no, let me herd you back. Like the good shepherd we talked about. Let me herd you back to the right direction. Let me show you how it's done. And he ruled not with an iron fist, but he ruled with compassion and mercy. Because that's the way a good king leads. A good king leaves a legacy of health and abundance and wholeness behind. A good king doesn't come and just destroy everything. So if you've ever had a boss, Mr. Borchers is our superintendent, and he's awesome. He's trying to get all this building stuff done because he wants to leave a legacy of the guy who really brought amazing things to our school. He got us in, the football field got renovated, the elementary school is getting renovated, the high school is getting renovated. He doesn't want to leave until that stuff is all in motion because he wants to leave a legacy for our school. He doesn't want to just leave and be like, all right, peace out. I'm struggling to find an assistant coach. I'm struggling to find good coaches to take over for me because I've been coaching for 22 years and I love it, but I'm not going to do it for 22 more years. So trying to find someone to pass that torch off to is difficult. I want to leave a legacy. I don't want to just give it to someone who will take it and be like, all right, I'm out. Whatever you do is on you. No, I want to find someone who can continue what we have been building and doing. I don't want to just hand it to someone who's going to destroy it. And that's what a good king doesn't want to leave it to someone who's going to just destroy it. So we've been talking, you guys are getting tired of hearing this. We as Christians are mini Christs. Our job is not to look at Jesus and be like, yeah, he was cool. Our job is to look at Jesus about what am I supposed to look like too. He is our true north. He is our compass heading for what our lives should look like. So if these 7 characteristics are characteristics of a good king, and we are princes and princesses of the kingdom, that means it is now our job to do what we can in good measure to be these things too, to exemplify these characteristics also. So we are to be centered. And our center comes from our faith. If we know who we are and whose we are, then when a decision comes up, it should be easy to make that decision because we are centered in faith. When a storm comes, we shouldn't lose our minds. When bad things happen, we shouldn't totally fall apart because we're like, all right, I don't understand this, and this is awful, but yet I know that somehow the Lord can redeem this. And when we have decisions to make, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Break out your old bracelets. Think about how Jesus would handle that situation. And I find this like a cheerleading. I'll get really mad at some drama that's happening. There's always drama when you're a cheerleading coach. And I want to get in there and but I'm like, no, what would Jesus do? I want to get in there and you're going to do 100 jumps and, get them. But that's not what Jesus would do. I try to come into every situation, no matter how mad I am at those girls, with mercy and compassion and ask them their side of the story. and try to deal with it in a way that lets them know that I still, even though I'm mad at them for what they did, I still love them, right? So we are to be people of integrity. When we say yes, we mean it. People know what they get from us. We shouldn't be inconsistent in whatever our realm is. We are protecting our realm, and part of that is being people of integrity. So if your realm is your family, your neighborhood, your work, whatever your realm is, we protect that with integrity. We protect it, but we still do it with mercy and compassion. We provide order. Parents, you know this is a struggle when you have kids. Providing order. Like in my classroom, it is my job to provide order. On my cheer team, it is my job to provide order. It is my job to not only protect my girls, but to keep our space safe and stress-free because they know what the rules are and they're being consistently managed. And to inspire creativity. I took a leadership training a couple years ago, and I realized that I need to harness the creativity of my girls. So like I have captain's meetings before practice, 15 minutes every time before practice, and I'm like, what do you want to do? What do you think we need to work on? And they'll come to me and be like, hey, we really want to do blah, 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 blah. And usually I'm like, okay, let's do it. Unless it's wearing, I hate tall socks and skirts. I think it's ugly. Unless it's tall socks and skirts, I'm like, no. Not while I'm coaching. But my job is to inspire creativity in them. And I found that when I can create a safe place and inspire the creativity of especially my captains, if I can harness the power of my captains, I don't have to work as hard, which is really nice. When I have good captains who I have given some leeway to do what they want, I don't have to work as hard. And they enjoy it, and they feel vested. And so my goal as a coach is to leave a legacy of cheering being like this safe, fun place where we inspire the school to good school spirit. I don't want to be like those movies. My brother, when my nieces were born, he's like, they're not being cheerleaders because cheerleaders are bees. That's slang for the bad word. A female dog used for breeding. He's like, I don't want my girls to be like that, like the movie star cheerleaders, you know what I mean? Who are like really just mean girls. And so my job as a coach to inspire my girls to not be mean girls. Okay? Your job in your family is to leave a legacy. All of you who are parents, like you want your children to grow up and be good parents themselves. Like I would think that's the goal of a parent, is to raise them to grow up to be good people themselves. If you're those of us who are still working, we want when we leave for them to be like, man, we were really glad to have them. They were an asset to our business. So our job as Christians is to leave a legacy of what the kingdom should look like in whatever sphere of influence we have. And when we leave here, we all have a different sphere of influence. And so that's my challenge to you today. And it was Jesus' challenge to the disciples. He didn't come to just perform. He came to train them, and he trained them to train other people. His job was to do all those 8 things and train his guys to do all those things, to train and train and train so that, like it would spread out. So Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. Make disciples of the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded. And I'm going to be with you. The cool thing is when a human person steps out of a job, then they're done. Like they're usually out, and you don't get to talk to them anymore. But Jesus is like, I'm going to step back and let you do it, but I'm here if you need to call on me. So my challenge to you as we come into this Christian season is to evaluate what realm where you are the king, and are you behaving like a king in your realm? And if not, is there some adjustments you might need to make? And you can ask the Lord to help you because he's with you. And he will be with you always in whatever you do. And all of God's people said, Amen. All right. If you have not